Hello, and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Thursday, April 24th. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, Jon Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 566 of the genocide in Gaza. Coming up, we'll be joined by Ahmed Alnaouq, co-editor of We Are Not Numbers, a landmark anthology of reportage, essays, and poetry by young writers from Gaza. Later on in the program, Jon will cover the latest resistance news, including a detailed tunnel ambush in the buffer zone in northern Gaza and the downing of 3 more U.S. Reaper drones over Yemen. But first, let's take a look at the news. Here's a brief summary of some of the latest developments this week in Palestine. It has been 53 days of a complete siege on the Gaza Strip, while Israeli forces accelerate the forced displacement of Palestinians, pushing them into smaller and smaller areas, and while bombing and airstrikes continue non-stop, killing dozens of people, including many children, every day. Between March 18th, when Israel broke the so-called ceasefire and resumed its mass-scale slaughter in Gaza, and today, nearly 1,900 Palestinians have been killed and 5,000 have been injured. That figure includes 600 children killed and approximately 1,600 children injured in just 5 weeks. On Tuesday, April 22nd, the Israeli army shelled the Al-Doaa Children's Hospital in Gaza City amid a barrage of attacks on the Tufah neighborhood. The Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza reported that Israeli airstrikes also targeted and destroyed the solar panels on the roof of the hospital, rendering what was left of its pediatric services non-functional. On Wednesday, another attack in the same neighborhood in Gaza City targeted the Jaffa school, which had been turned into a shelter for displaced families. At least 10 people were killed and many more were injured as fires engulfed people's tents in the courtyard and sheltering families inside the building. Journalist Abdelkader Sabah reported that 4 classrooms were targeted overnight, and in the morning people gathered in the wreckage of the courtyard to mourn children who were killed in the attacks. Sabah said that, quote, "The large number of martyrs has become normalized." Survivors of the attack, speaking to Al Jazeera, described scenes of absolute horror. An injured man told the agency that, quote, "My 3 cousins, 3 children were lost. They were pulled out completely charred." Another survivor said, quote, "We were asleep when suddenly we saw a light like the light of the day of judgment, fire everywhere. I grabbed my daughters and ran. They were injured and their father was in the bathroom. The girls were screaming for him, and we lost each other. As we were fleeing, they bombed the school again. People were screaming, women were crying and searching for their relatives. I don't know what to say. People here were burned alive," she said. Medics at nearby Al-Shifa Hospital could only assist by sterilizing the wounds, as there were no bandages available to use, Al Jazeera said. In Jabalia in northern Gaza, also on Wednesday, Israeli forces attacked a residential building, and when civil defense rescue workers came to provide care for the wounded, the Israeli army bombed the building again in a so-called double-tap strike. Israeli forces have continued to bomb the tents of displaced people in Al-Mawasi, on the sand dunes in southern Gaza, where earlier in the genocide, Israel designated the area a, quote, safe zone. On April 19th, an Israeli airstrike targeted the tents of displaced families in Al-Mawasi. I think we have that video. Just days later, on April 22nd, at least 10 Palestinians were killed in another airstrike on Al-Mawasi. A week ago, on April 16th, as we reported, an Israeli attack on Al-Mawasi killed at least 10 Palestinians, including children, one of whom used a wheelchair. Catherine Russell, the executive director of the UN Children's Fund UNICEF, stated, quote, "Airstrikes on tents in Gaza reportedly killed 15 children, including a child with disabilities who burned to death," noting that images of children burning while sheltering in makeshift tents should shake us all to our core. Other attacks were reported this week in Burej refugee camp and in Deir Balah in central Gaza. Because of the last 53 days of Israel's complete humanitarian siege on Gaza, the hunger and medical situation is rapidly deteriorating into catastrophe. According to Euromed Human Rights Monitor, quote, "Families in the Gaza Strip have been forced to cut the number of their daily meals, resulting in noticeable weight loss among residents. In the near total absence of fresh and nutritious food, most people now rely almost entirely on the enclave's limited supply of canned goods, while many others have become fully dependent on food banks for their daily meals. However, these food banks have come under intensified Israeli military attacks in recent weeks, further depriving residents of access to even the most basic food necessities." The human rights group added that, quote, "The starvation imposed by Israel on civilians in the Gaza Strip represents one of the most severe and inhumane forms of genocide, as well as a grave violation of human dignity. It extends beyond the mere denial of food, and it also seeks to dismantle the population's ability to survive by destroying livelihoods, obstructing humanitarian aid, targeting sources of food production, and deliberately disrupting essential supply chains. The consequences of this policy extend far beyond the present," Euromed warned, threatening the very future of Palestinians as a national group. By creating a generation at risk of long-term physical, psychological, and cognitive disabilities, Israel reveals a deliberate and destructive intent, one that aligns with the defining characteristics of genocide under genocide under international law. Recently, Jonathan Whitall of the United Nations Humanitarian Office described the situation in Gaza as, quote, "deprivation by design," amid Israel's deliberate dismantling of Palestinian life.
In Gaza today, people are being deprived of the basic necessities for human survival. It's been more than 45 days of total blockade, total closure. Nothing has entered. No food, no relief supplies, no fuel, no commercial goods, nothing. This is deprivation by design. Hospitals and health centers are running low on supplies, while beds are filling up with mass casualties that continue to enter as the airstrikes are intensifying across the strip. Water supply has dramatically decreased. UN warehouses of food are running empty. We've had to close the UN-supported bakeries. There's no cooking gas left. People are burning trash just to heat the remaining food that they have left. At the same time, Gaza is being suffocated. Almost 70% of the strip is now either in a displacement zone or a no-go zone where people can't reach. Lands being annexed from the north, from the east, from the south of the strip as forces advance. When fishers go out to the sea, they're shot at, they're killed. Gaza's being starved, it's being bombed, it's being strangled. This looks like the deliberate dismantling of Palestinian life. The blockade needs to be lifted, humanitarian aid needs to be facilitated to enter, and the ceasefire needs to be reinstated. Lives depend on it.
That was Jonathan Whitall of the UN Humanitarian Office. Israel targeted and destroyed dozens of heavy equipment vehicles belonging to the Palestinian civil defense in Gaza on April 21st and 22nd. According to the Jabalia municipality, an Israeli military strike destroyed all 9 wheel loaders that were donated and sent in during the January ceasefire, in addition to a sewage suction truck and a 5 cubic meter mobile water tanker. Furthermore, a manhole maintenance vehicle, 5 service vehicles, a 936 loader, 2 tractors, a garbage compactor truck, a solar distribution tanker, and a mobile generator to operate water wells all sustained partial damage. The municipality announced that all of its services, including street clearance, waste removal, sewage line maintenance, and water services, have been completely suspended, exacerbating the already dire situation and heightening the risk of disease. Journalist Abdulkader Sabah reported from the scene in Jabalia, noting that these vehicles were also necessary to recover victims from underneath the rubble. He stated that this was yet another way that the Israeli army is trying to dismantle all humanitarian services inside Gaza. The Gaza government condemned Israel's attacks on these vehicles as, quote, criminal. The targeting of municipal headquarters by Israeli occupation aircraft and the bombing of heavy equipment designated for rescue and rubble removal, including bulldozers and other machinery, is a criminal continuation of the war of extermination, the Hamas political party said in a statement. Quote, the systematic destruction of livelihoods and civilian facilities in the Gaza Strip will not succeed in pushing our people to surrender to the malicious displacement plans, nor will it succeed in dissuading them from clinging to their land, their determination, and that of their sons in the valiant resistance to confront and defeat the aggression and to achieve our legitimate rights to freedom and self-determination, end quote. We've published many features on the Electronic Intifada in the last week, but we wanted to highlight excerpts of Fatima Hassouna, the photographer who made a difference, by Asma Abdu, writing from Gaza. On last week's live stream, we reported on Israel's assassination of the photojournalist Fatima Hassouna, who was killed along with her entire family in an Israeli strike on their home in Al-Tufah, a neighborhood of Gaza City, on April 16th. Asma, who was Fatima's childhood friend, writes that, quote, Fatima was deeply committed to her craft. She never simply documented a moment. She became part of it. She had a rare ability to earn trust quickly. The subjects of her photography were not just faces or stories. They were people she befriended. Fatima's camera wasn't a barrier. It was a bridge. She always said that she wanted not just to carry a message, but to show kindness to the people she filmed or photographed. At Fatima's core was a sense of purpose. She came from a place of love. We lived just a street apart in Gaza City all our lives. After the genocide began, we would walk everywhere together. There were no taxis around, and prices were rising even higher. Each morning, Fatima would call. Wait for me, she would say. Let's walk together. And so we did. Those walks were more than just a means of getting from A to B. They were our little escapes. We shared everything, sorrows, secrets, silly thoughts. I never had to pretend to be anything I wasn't when I was with Fatima. There were no walls between us, just warmth and honesty. I wish that she was still around to tell her how much I loved her eye for a good photograph or image, how she saw not just the suffering in a person, but the soul behind it, how she brought dignity to every frame. Last winter, we were working in Al-Yarmouk Stadium, where the conditions were especially dire. Seeing the suffering around her, Fatima said that we must help. I asked her to speak with the director of the film project she was working on about distributing blankets. She did. And soon we were part of a mission to not only document hardship, but to relieve it. That day, we weren't just storytellers. We were part of the story. And Fatima was glowing. She had done something she had always dreamed of. She had made a difference. Fatima was only 25. She was my sister, my confidant, my light. May the world never forget the name Fatima Hassouna. May the stories she told outlive the genocide that took her. And may we all learn from her to live with courage, to work with purpose, and to love always with everything we have. Those are excerpts from Fatima Hassouna, the photographer who made a difference, by Asma Abdu, writing from Gaza. Turning to the occupied West Bank, my colleague Tamara Nassar reported on the tightening restrictions of movement of Palestinians, while Israeli military raids of Palestinian cities and refugee camps reach new peaks of violence over the last 18 months. She writes that, quote, Israel's far-right finance minister Bezalel Smotrich dubbed 2025 the year of sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. the pseudo-biblical name Israel uses for the West Bank in order to give its occupation and illegal colonization a veneer of legitimacy. Coupled with accelerating settler violence that surged by 30% compared to the same period last year, the Israeli government has been implementing a series of changes to policy and administration in the West Bank that is fundamentally changing the territory's character while evading international scrutiny. This is helping to realize longtime Israeli ambitions to tighten Palestinian Bantustans while enhancing continuity between Jewish settlements and present-day Israel. In the first 3 months of the year, more Israeli settlement units have been approved than in all of 2024 combined. Israel's so-called Higher Planning Council, which manages settlement activity, approved over 14,000 housing units in less than 3 months, surpassing the nearly 10,000 units approved during all of last year. This is in part due to the dramatic change in policy under the current Israeli government that reinvented the process in favor of accelerating settlement building and expansion, according to settlement watchdog group Peace Now. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 was working on transferring Israeli military authority of the West Bank to civilian control by creating, in 2023, a settlement administration within Israel's defense ministry that reports directly to him. Quote, "It will be easier to swallow in the international and legal context," 𝐓𝐡𝐞 said, "so that they won't say that we are doing annexation here." Just months before October 7th, 2023, the Israeli government transferred the responsibility for planning settlements to 𝐓𝐡𝐞. The government also changed the planning and approval procedures for building and expanding settlements. The Prime Minister's green light is no longer required, for example. That's all from Tamara Nassar's 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Speeds Up Land Theft in West Bank. Be sure to read more from that report on electronicintifada.net. Meanwhile, a child was killed in Al-Yamoun, near the northern West Bank city of Jenin, on Wednesday, April 23rd. Defense for Children International Palestine reported that Israeli soldiers shot and killed 12-year-old Mahmoud Methkal Ali Abu al-Hajja with live ammunition. Mahmoud was struck in the abdomen when Israeli forces opened fire indiscriminately from about 80 meters away. Mahmoud was carried to a private vehicle which brought him to Al-Hadaf Medical Center in Al-Yamoun, after which he was transferred in an ambulance to Jenin Governmental Hospital, where he was pronounced dead on arrival, DCIP stated. Mahmoud, alongside other boys and young men, were allegedly throwing stones toward Israeli soldiers deployed around the cemetery, while other soldiers raided a residential building nearby. According to information collected by DCIP, the Israeli military has been carrying out an ongoing military operation throughout the Jenin Governorate since January 21st. On April 17th, a week ago, Israeli forces shot and killed Jihad Adham Rebhi Adali, a 16-year-old child south of Nablus, during an invasion and raid into the town of Osserin. Palestinian ambulances attempted to reach the scene and provide aid, but were blocked by Israeli forces, according to documentation by Defense for Children International Palestine. Israeli authorities withheld Jihad's body. Jihad grew up in a hyper-militarized environment where no Palestinian child is safe from Israeli forces, said Ayed Abu Aktesh, Accountability Program Director at DCIP. Now, even in death, Jihad cannot rest as Israeli authorities prevent his family from burying his body and mourning him. Jihad is one of the dozens of Palestinian children whose bodies remain withheld after Israeli forces killed them in violation of international law. Israeli forces have killed 23 Palestinian children in the occupied West Bank in 2025, according to documentation collected by DCIP. In international activism news, there were massive protests in Morocco aimed at stopping the docking and unloading of 2 Maersk cargo ships headed to Israel. According to the Mask Off Maersk campaign, who we've recently hosted on the Electronic Intifada live stream and podcast, Moroccan port workers and civil society have taken a bold stand against the flow of U.S. military cargo to Israel, halting operations on the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Maersk ship, which is set to pick up F-35 fighter jet components at Tangier Med port. These parts, to be offloaded by the Maersk Detroit, are reportedly bound for Israel's Nevatim airbase, a key site for F-35 maintenance amid intensified bombardment of Gaza. In Casablanca, mass protests delayed the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Maersk from docking for nearly 39 hours. Protests also erupted at ports in France, Tangier, Spain, and along the U.S. East Coast as part of the Mask Off Maersk campaign. At Tangier Med, dozens of port workers refused to service the ship despite the risk of employer retaliation, with at least one worker resigning in protest. Major Moroccan labor unions, including the Port Workers and Seafarers Union, the Democratic Confederation of Labor, and the National Labor Union of Morocco, issued nationwide calls to boycott ships carrying weapons tied to Israel's war on Gaza. In their statement, the Port Workers and Seafarers Union stated, "We reject outright and without compromise any participation in logistical operations that contribute to the Zionist entity's war crimes, whether by fueling, towing, or unloading the ship or any like it." Mask Off Maersk says that, quote, despite the fact that Maersk has previously retaliated against Moroccan workers refusing to service ships in the past, and the heavy ongoing repression from the company, workers stood firm against the company's complicity. We call on international solidarity and organizations to support the brave Moroccan people and workers who are taking a principled stance against the flow of military equipment through their ports to facilitate genocide. We'll continue to follow these developments from the global Mask Off Maersk campaign. But finally, as we always do, we wanted to highlight people expressing joy, determination, and resilience across Palestine. 1 week ago, on April 17th, right after our live stream, our contributor Abu Bakr Ahmed published a personal statement and a video on Twitter about his decision to leave Gaza for medical treatment and to complete his university education. Let's play that.
I actually have no words to tell you what it means.
العزيز أنا فخور فيك جدا.
Just the final time in Gaza, I have mixed feelings. It's a bittersweet feeling already. I'm leaving my friends, I'm leaving my family, and I don't have the words to express what is in my heart. I'm happy, but at the same time sad. I'm just filming this after more than 560 days of the genocide in Gaza. I've done everything in my power, and I believe that I need to continue. But this is not my decision. It's just a decision that I took out of complete necessity, and it's already medical, and I just want to continue, and I promise I will continue. I will not leave my friends, I will not leave my family. I will continue doing my part. I will continue being here. I will come back here as soon as possible to defend this homeland. But this decision is just something that I had to take out of a big necessity. And just thanks to everyone, to my family, my friends, to Rahman, to Khalid, to everyone of my family, my mother, my father. And I believe and I promise that I will do everything that I can to make sure that Palestine will be free. But today is the temporary end of a journey that is spent and sacrificed every drop of blood in my veins.
Abu Bakr is now safe and sound in Ireland, where he will be continuing his studies and looking after his health. We're also proud of him. We're relieved. We're always worried about him still. Ali, why don't you come on and say a few words about our beloved friend and colleague?
Well, I'm so glad he's safe. I know what an agonizing decision he's expressed, what an agonizing decision it was to leave, to take the opportunity to leave, which was, there was an evacuation of a small number of people, and he'd had the long-standing opportunity which he hadn't taken, and finally, with much support from his family, took the decision, as you saw, that it was very difficult. And I know that it's something that Abu Bakr wouldn't have wanted to do, but we're glad that he's safe. And now's the time for him, after more than 560 days of putting on that vest, that press vest, which we know provides no protection. As he said before, it actually makes you a target. And yet he did it. He reported every day, knowing that that day could be his very last day, that report could be his last report. And he took us the length and breadth of Gaza. You'll recall a few weeks ago when we showed Abu Bakr's videos from across Gaza. And we're so grateful to him for all of that. And Abu Bakr, if you're watching, we just want to say how happy we are for you. We can't wait for the day you get to go back to Gaza in safety, when everyone there can live in peace, when you're reunited with your family. But for now, we wish you rest, good health, and we know that when the time is right, you're going to be speaking out again. Nothing can silence your voice, and we send you all our love.
Yes, we absolutely do. And and he was talking about his health and the medical necessity that was a big factor in his very agonizing and really a decision that's impossible for anyone to make. And so we're so relieved that he's able to get treatment for acute malnutrition that he's been suffering with, over I don't know, God, how many months now. So yeah, he's, and just to know that he's somewhere safe and he's being taken care of is really, it's so important. And I know that all of our listeners and viewers are also really, relieved. But still there's that worry, it is an agonizing decision. I mean, to leave everything that you've ever known at this time, and to leave your family behind is
and that people are put in that position at all to make these agonizing, horrific decisions, not knowing whether you're going to see your family again, not knowing whether you're going to see your homeland again, having to make these no one should need to make them. No one should have to be in that position, because this genocide should stop and everyone should be safe. And that's what we're still working for. But we're grateful when anyone gets to safety, and that's what we wish for everyone. And we're so happy that Abu Bakr is safe now.
We are. Well, thanks. And let's move to our guest and talk about this incredible project. We Are Not Numbers.
Thanks, Nora. And you are, of course, watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Ali Abu Nema, here with my colleague Nora Barrows-Friedman. For as long as I can remember, Palestinian stories have been flavored with sorrow. Even our most cherished memories are, in some way or another, tinged with misery, whether it's a girl preparing for her wedding, a young man migrating to secure a better future, or an old woman wearing the key to what used to be her home as a necklace. A thread woven through them all is the longing for freedom and home. You'll find that thread woven throughout We Are Not Numbers, The Voices of Gaza's Youth, a new collection published in the UK today by Penguin. It is available now from booksellers, and it will be coming to the United States soon. It's edited by Ahmed Alnaouq and Pam Bailey. That brief excerpt I just read is from one of the pieces in the book, a beautiful essay by Dana 𝐓𝐡𝐶. She is one of several dozen Gaza writers whose work, encompassing reportage, personal reflections, poems, and memoirs, is featured in We Are Not Numbers. The first page of the book states that this anthology is dedicated to 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, the teacher, author, mentor, and friend who guided so many of Gaza's students and future leaders, including most of our writers. His body was killed on 6 December 2023 by an Israeli strike, but his spirit lives on. The book also honors 4 writers whose work is featured in it, who were killed during this genocide. They are Yusuf Dawas, Mahmoud Alnaouq, Huda al-Susi, and Muhammad Hamo. I'm proud to say that the Electronic Intifada has had the privilege to publish the work of many of these writers over the years, and we continue to do so. The award-winning novelist Camila Shamsi says, picking up this book may seem hard because of the subject matter. Putting it down is even harder. The voices of Gaza's young writers are so moving and varied and astonishing. You'll carry We Are Not Numbers in your heart for a very long time. I can only agree with that, and I'm so pleased to welcome Ahmed Alnaouq back to the Electronic Intifada live stream to talk about this new book. Ahmed is co-founder and director of We Are Not Numbers, the project that gave rise to this extraordinary collection. He is a writer, journalist, human rights activist, and among his many activities, he hosts a podcast with Palestine, Deep Dive. Ahmed, congratulations on the publication of We Are Not Numbers. It's an extraordinary achievement, especially that you are able to bring it into the world in the midst of this ongoing genocide in which you personally and all the writers featured in the book have lost so much.
Thank you very much, Ali. Thank you, Electronic Intifada, for the continued support that you gave to We Are Not Numbers. And just before we came to this live stream, I was told by our senior editor that the contributors of We Are Not Numbers contributed more than 170 pieces to the Electronic Intifada. So thank you very much for your support.
That makes me very proud. Yeah. We hadn't counted them, but that makes me very proud. It only makes me think it should be more than that. So that will continue for sure. Before we get into the discussion, I want us to watch this video of Anas Mohammed Dejnene reading his piece. It's called I Want the World to Know, which is included in the book. Let's watch it.
I want the world to know that Gaza is all about life, just like any other place in the world. I want the world to know that Gaza is not the devastated, dusty, moldy place too often shown on the news. I want the world to know that Palestinians are neither victims nor heroes. Just like any other people, we wake up every day to go to school or work. We laugh when we hear a funny joke and cry when we have a toothache. I also want the world to know that there is really nothing that can stop us from falling in love. I want the world to know that some teens in Gaza skip out on their 5th class at school so they can see the girls they love and hand them naively written love letters. We love the smell of the sea and the colors of the sky, especially at sunset. I want the world to know that Palestine has writers, artists, thinkers, and most importantly, lovers. I want the world to know that we're humans just like you.
That was Anas Mohammed Janine reading his piece, I Want the World to Know, in a video that was filmed several years ago. And of course, we could see you in it, Ahmed. But as I mentioned, Anas's beautiful piece is included in the just published book, We Are Not Numbers. What can you tell us about how Anas is doing today?
Well, I have to say that this video, as much as it describes Gaza and the project of We Are Not Numbers and our dreams and our aspirations, it also gives me huge pain when I watch it, because we recorded this video 7 or 8 years ago, when I was still in Gaza, and when Gaza was Gaza, before the genocide, before the slaughter, when we were having relatively normal life. Now, unfortunately, none of these places that were shown in the video is still the same. Most of these places are destroyed. Anas now, just 4 months before the genocide, Anas managed to leave Gaza to work as a teacher, as an English teacher in Kuwait. But his father was killed in this genocide. His younger brother, Ahmed, was severely injured. He lost his home. And although his brother was severely injured, he is still trying to work right now to support for his family. So Anas is now married and he lives in Kuwait, but he still, like, his heart lives in Gaza, and he's still devastated for what's happening in Gaza. And also me, I was in this video as well. I lost my family, I lost my home. So this video is, although it conveys the message that we would like to convey right now, that Gaza is full of lovers, of people, of thinkers, of dreamers, it's still very painful for me to watch it.
Yeah. I can feel that, absolutely. Ahmed, in the introduction of We Are Not Numbers, the book, it tells the story of how We Are Not Numbers, the project, got started. And it's a very personal story for you and Pam Bailey, who's your co-editor. Many of us are familiar with We Are Not Numbers, the project, but for those who are new, give us a sense of what the project is and how it came about.
Well, it's funny how history repeats itself, how events in Gaza repeat itself. The story of We Are Not Numbers started. The inspiration behind We Are Not Numbers started after the Israeli offensive in Gaza in 2014, in which I lost my brother and many of my friends. And because my brother was more of a friend to me, he was my older brother, and I loved him so much. And he was killed in that war. I was severely depressed, not only because I lost my brother, but because I was reading the media and how they portray the Palestinians, and they always portray the Palestinians as terrorists who live under the rubble in Gaza. And I was severely destroyed mentally from the loss of my brother. And back then, Pam, who was my friend, she reached out to me on Facebook and she asked about how I feel. I told her, I'm feeling okay. She said, no, tell me something real. And then I told her I'm severely depressed, and when I'm all alone, I go to the graveyard, I sit next to my brother's grave, and I burst out crying. And the first thing that came to her mind is to ask me to write about my brother a story, because she's a journalist and this is what she's good at. So I wrote my first ever story about my brother, and I was only 19 years old back then. I was not an established writer or author. I'm not, but back then my English was broken a little bit, and she helped me edit the story, and then we published this story online. As I said many times before, writing my first story ever was very therapeutic to me. And then when I finally found my story published in many international magazines, I feel that something is really changing in me, because for the first time ever, many people who read my story came out to me on Facebook and they told me that they've read my story. They were moved by it and they encouraged me to keep on writing. So for the first time in my life, I felt like, okay, there's something interesting. Like there's something I can do in this life that for me seemed like useless and did not make any sense. And I thought, if writing my story was therapeutic to me, if writing my story moved many people around the world, If writing my story meant something to others, then I have to continue writing my stories. And then, because I felt better at that time, we came up to this idea of creating a platform for youth and refugees, for young people in Gaza who came out of this war, to encourage them to write their own personal stories in English and share them with the world. So what happened is that we replicated what happened with me and this American journalist with many other Palestinians. We linked them up with international mentors to help them write their stories in English, and then we would publish these stories online. And we have been writing hundreds of stories. We published over the past 10 years over 2,000 stories. These are like personal stories, poems, features, all types of stories, all written by young people in Gaza who are unaffiliated to any political party, who are just writing their hearts out for the Western audiences to hear them out and to hear their stories.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, just the amount of writers and the amount of work that you've been publishing is just it's so. And every time I come across one of the We Are Not Numbers stories or poems or just very short vignette sort of narratives, I'm just struck by how personal and raw and what a beautiful, intimate snapshot of everyday life in Gaza, pre and post genocide, but there's always something that kind of grabs you and moves you and brings you into the story. And I'm as a fan of We Are Not Numbers and the writing projects that has come out of that, but also as a reporter myself and as an editor of the Electronic Intifada, which has been, as Ali said, we're very proud to have hosted these incredible works of art and truth. So,
thank you very much. I know there is something powerful about our stories because they're the unfiltered stories and live experiences of the Palestinians in Gaza. We don't put any layers of filters or politics or anything that would distort the image, the lived experiences of the Palestinians in Gaza. These are just young people who lived under genocide, under blockade, under occupation their entire life. And they're just writing their emotions to the world. They just bleed their emotions and they show it to the world. So there's something powerful about that. No one can undermine the storytelling of these people because it is unfiltered, it's clean, it is lovely, it is powerful. These are the lives, the dreams of the people in Gaza who everyone needs to listen to, regardless of your political affiliations, regardless of what you think about Israel-Palestine conflict or whatever you put it. These are the unfiltered stories of the lived experiences of the Palestinians in Gaza. And I think everyone needs to read these stories. If anyone wants to know more about Palestine, if anyone wants to know anything about Gaza, go to the stories, go read the stories of these young people, and you'll really understand what's happening. Because unfortunately, for the past 77 years, Gaza and Palestinians, we've only been mentioned in the news when there's bloodshed. We've only been talked about as numbers, as statistics. And even now in the genocide, even the numbers that we give and we talk about in the media, they're like contested. People are saying, no, this number is wrong. But we are more than that. And we don't people to talk about as mere statistics. We need people to look at us and to read our lives, to read our stories and put themselves in our shoes so that they understand what's happening. Otherwise, no one can really understand what being a Palestinian means.
And the thing I love about this book, and Tamara, can we show the book again just so people can see it? Of course, it's called We Are Not Numbers, and it's being released today in the UK. And I also just looked, you can pre-order it and probably get it in the United States as well. The world being as it is, it won't be so hard to get. But over the last couple of days that I've had this book, it's what's wonderful is that you can sometimes you read a story and it affects you, very emotionally. it really touches you. But the nice thing is you can read a story and put it down and come back to it and read another one, and you can kind of flip back and forwards, because the way it's organized, this book covers 10 years of We Are Not Numbers writing. So going back, as Ahmed said, right to just after the 2014 Israeli massacre war on Gaza, up to almost the present day. And so you can, in a way, visit Gaza, as we did with that video, at different times over the last 10 years. And it does have an enormous emotional impact. So it's a really wonderful book for that. What I also want to mention, Ahmed, is that the model that We Are Not Numbers has developed and used is that the young writers from Gaza are paired up with mentors. These are typically volunteers outside Gaza, and they work with the writers on their stories. They you know, many of the writers are writing in their second language. English is typically their second language, not their first language. Talk about the role of the mentors. What has their impact been? What type of friendships have formed? I know it started as a way to assist in the writing process, but that has become more than just that. Talk about how mentors have played a role here.
Of course, Ali, but let me first go back to what you mentioned earlier, is that this book is a collection of stories that were published during the past 10 years. Actually, we could publish a book about the stories of the Palestinians after the 7th of October during the genocide, but we meant to publish these stories that happened before the 7th of October, because unfortunately now in the media, everything you hear about is like October 7th and both October 7th. But no, we wanted to show the world what happened 7 years before October the 7th. Because if you really want to understand this genocide, you really need to go back and read how the Palestinians were living before the October the 7th and after October the 7th. So this is like a book of 10 years. And every year, if you go to it, there are 10 chapters in this book, and every chapter talks about 1 year from 2015 until 2025. And anything you want to know about Gaza during that era, go to We Are Not Numbers book and you will find it. For example, we wrote about the many wars that happened 2021, 2019, and also the March of Return, the blockade, every theme you want to know more about, you can find 1 or 2 stories in this book that talk about. And yes, the mentors thing, I'm very proud of what we have done. You know, over the past 10 years, we recruited more than 400 writers from Gaza, mainly from Gaza, but also from Palestinians all around the world and inside Palestine, West Bank, and inside Palestine 48. And, you know, what I am proud of is that we linked them up with international mentors. We recruited more than 150 mentors who helped these writers throughout these years write their stories in good English, you know, especially in Gaza, because most of our writers, they lived their entire life under the blockade of Gaza. We're talking about most of our writers are 18, 20, 19, 21, 20 years old. And most of them lived their entire life under the blockade, under the siege in Gaza. And they never had the chance of meeting people from outside Gaza. I'm not talking about outside Palestine, from outside Gaza. Little foreigners would come to Gaza. Little people who speak a different language than Arabic came to Gaza. So that's why, although our writers are very talented and they speak English very well, but there is also like a language barrier. And this language barrier is broken by those mentors who help our writers master the language. And they also train them on how to write their personal stories. They train them on creative writing. They train them on storytelling. They train them on everything that they need in order to tell their stories in a very nice and neat way. But over time, the relationship became more than a friend, became like they are friends. So that's why many of our mentors became very close friends to our writers. Many of our mentors helped many of our writers like write their CVs, like apply for a scholarship, get a job here or there, and many of them help them as like to console them or to give them therapy sometimes if they need. So I'm very proud of this connection, because it kind of broke the not only the stereotypes about the Palestinians, but also it broke the siege mentally. Because in Gaza, we're never allowed to meet people from different cultures, from different religions, from different places. But in We Are Not Numbers, we connect our writers with our mentors who are scattered all around the world. And they get to know each other, and they get to know their cultures. That for you, for people who live in the West, maybe this is something naive or it doesn't really matter. But for us in Gaza, meeting someone from outside Gaza is a big deal. And it really helped our writers, and it really helped our mentors know and understand what is really happening in Gaza.
Yeah.
And they got to know our writers as a humans.
Yeah. It's so important, and it's so beautiful to see the fruits of the work, whether it's, developing these relationships with mentors and vice versa, and really kind of expanding the reach of their writing all over the world. Well, let's listen to another piece from the book. This one is called I Am a Girl, and it was written by and is read by Yara Judah.
I am a girl who has no dreams and maybe no future. In a blink of an eye, I could be without hands, heart, and soul. Shall I also tell you about the beautiful park turned into scarred, barren land? Shall I tell you, I would love to fly on a plane, but I'm so scared of being killed by one? Shall I tell you that I'm scared to look at the sky and count the stars, because maybe they will suddenly turn into the lights that kill? I am a girl who in parts of the world where the people matter would be considered too young to ask such things. Much less know anything about them. I am a girl who is forced to be an old woman at the age of 16.
Wow, that was very moving. Yeah, tell us about that writer, Yara.
Well, this piece is also included in our book, and I mean every sentence of her story needs some time to be entangled, because there's a lot of sophistication, and there are a lot of stories that we need to tell about each of her sentences. And it really amazes me how she was only 16 years old when she wrote this piece. She was only 16 years old when she did this video, and she said that I am a girl who's forced to be a woman at the age of 16. And I believe her, because right now if you go to Gaza, you'll find so many children, little kids, who are forced to live like men, to go and work under bombardment in the genocide right now in order to support for their families, because Israel killed their father or their parents or whatever. And I believe in the future, these stories that we're publishing in this book will be studied by psychologists, maybe, in order to understand the ramification of the mental health on the people in Gaza. Yara was one of the youngest writers to join We Are Not Numbers, and I still believe when she joined We Are Not Numbers, she was very young, 16 years old. Most of our writers are 18 and more, but she has always been very, very talented. Now, Yara, only a few months before the genocide, Yara got married, and she was 16 when she joined We Are Not Numbers, but that was 10 years ago. Just a few months before the genocide, she got married, and now she managed to leave and live in Saudi Arabia with her husband, and now she's become a recent mother. She's now a mother. She has a child, Ashraf, who's only 1 month old, and she lives in Saudi Arabia, but all of her family are still in Gaza. Her mother and father and siblings, they're still in Gaza.
It's really especially moving watching that. Was filmed a few years ago, and then knowing now what has happened. And of course, everyone in Gaza is always aware that war and attack can happen anytime, and that's so deeply reflected in her words. So I'm so glad we could share that. Ahmed, who are you hoping will read this book, and what impact do you hope it will have in the world?
Well, I want every single person in the world to read this book. I want to see it in every shelf, in every house, in the UK, in the US, in Europe, and all around the world. This book is not about politics. This is way bigger than politics. This is about human life. This is about the Palestinians. It's about the humans. 4 of our writers were killed in this genocide, and our co-founder was killed. I want people to go and read these stories. All of these writers, more than 50 contributors, have stories in this book, and all of them, they either lost loved ones, some of them were killed, all of them lost their homes, all of them were displaced. And these stories need to be amplified. These stories need to be read by every single person in the world, whatever their background is, whatever their background or religion is. People need to read these stories, because if they need to understand what Palestine is, if they really need to understand what Gaza is, what living in Gaza under the genocide, under the blockade, under the occupation, they need to read this story to better understand what is really happening there. Enough with reading. It's very important actually to read about facts and human rights organization, where they're talking about Gaza and the statistics and numbers. But more importantly, you need to read the stories of the young people in Gaza who are writing their heart out to you to understand what's happening. So many of our writers, especially during this genocide, so many of them would write their pieces on their phones, and they would wait for days to have a chance to send their stories to us. So we get their stories that they were written by their smartphones, because they lost their homes, they lost electricity, they lost internet connection, and they would send it to us in order to publish their stories. Those people, writing these stories, writing this book took our writers and our mentors 10 years of work, and a lot of work, and they need to be heard, they need to be read. So please get yourself a copy. It is available in the UK and in Europe and in Asia. In September, it will be released in the US by a different publisher. Interlink will publish this book in the US and North America. Penguin is publishing this book in Europe and in the UK. We also have a translation in Italian. So if you read Italy, the book is also released today with a different publisher in Italy. Soon we will have different translations, Arabic, French, and Spanish, hopefully soon. So please get yourself a copy and make the Palestinian Voices a bestseller.
I second that. Get yourself several copies and give them to people. If you can afford to, something that everyone can do is ask their libraries to order it. That's something that people can do. So you can hopefully make it available to the widest audience possible. These are truly extraordinary pieces of writing, and it's truly an extraordinary task that you undertook, you and your co-editor Pam Bailey, to put this book together during this genocide, and with all of the difficulty and the pain that it entails to get through each day. nowadays. And of course, the book We Are Not Numbers is something that we really celebrate. It comes out of the extraordinary work over the last decade of We Are Not Numbers, the project. And so I just want to remind people, just show the We Are Not Numbers website again. And people can go to We Are Not Numbers and learn more about the project, learn more about how they can get involved or how they can support the work you do, which is truly essential work. And so, Ahmed, thank you again for all you're doing and for sharing some of the time you have with the Electronic Intifada. And we hope to see you back on our live stream again soon.
Thank you very, very much, Nora and Ali. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you,
Always
Ahmed.
an honor to have you. Thank you. Oh, that was beautiful. Very moving pieces. I wasn't like emotionally prepared for that.
And it's also a very intimate experience when you read them in the book, because you really do feel like you're having a conversation with some of these young writers, because their writing is very raw, it's very real, it's very surprising, it's humorous. There's a lot of humor in the book. So it is extraordinary, and I hope people really will take it, because remember that Israel has placed, as Ahmed mentioned, Israel has placed a blockade on Gaza for now almost 2 decades with the intention of isolating people there from the world and isolating the world from them. And so this book really shatters that isolation in a very profound way.
Yeah. And I mentioned this before we were on air, but my mom has been working with some of the writers through We Are Not Numbers as a mentor. And she just, emailed them. So if, I know people are very eager to want to learn more about the project and possibly become a mentor themselves. So yeah, go to the website, wearenotnumbers.org. And you can learn all about the project there. And it's just like there's so many ways in which I'm reminded and I think about the impact that our friend 𝐓𝐻𝐿 had on the world. And every time I read something from We Are Not Numbers, there's a way in which I read it in 𝐓𝐻𝐿's voice as well. And it remains like this very, very special, intimate way to keep his work alive and his legacy, up there, always. And so yeah, it's just I'm very proud, and very moved as always. Well, thank you. So let's bring Jon on to talk about the resistance this week in Gaza. Hi, Jon.
Hi, guys. That was great segment.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Really good. So not only Gaza, but also Yemen has been continuing their humanitarian interventions in the Red Sea. Just take it away,
as
Jon.
Craig Makhaiber called it. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, well, the Americans and the Israelis have now very formally intertwined their two operations. So we keep following both Gaza and Yemen, and we'll do that again this week.
Incredible. All right, go for it. Thanks so much, Jon.
So you are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada. I am Jon Elmer. This is the Resistance Report for day 566. I'll be covering Yemen coming up, but let's start in Gaza this week. We'll start by showing you an updated map. I showed you this map last week, but the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has updated this map. We are on day 54 of a total siege blockade of Gaza. No food, medicine, medical supplies, no tents, nothing. Nothing has gotten into Gaza for 54 days. now, and there doesn't seem to be any end in sight to that siege. You can see on this map, the purple zones are buffer zone that Israel has set up, and the orange is displacement orders, so evacuation orders. We have 70% of the Gaza Strip right now is either buffer zone or no-go zones. We have 500,000 people have been displaced just since March 18th, when Israel resumed the war full on, with the 2 a.m. massacre of 400 people, including 170 children, with 80 strikes in less than 10 minutes to announce the resumption of the war. So you can see by that map that Rafah is completely it's a complete no-go zone all through Rafah. I talked to you about the Morag corridor on the show last week. And of course, in the center, you see the Netzarim corridor. The IDF has taken up to Salahuddin Road, but the western side of the Netzarim corridor is a no-go zone. So it is off limits to Palestinians, and this has been a tightening siege. 1.9 million Palestinians are in need of emergency shelter. That means they're living in tents. And the Israeli military in their field reports continues to brag about this. Nora reported on the destruction of the 40 heavy machinery vehicles from the Gaza municipality. These are the kind of things that Israel has been bragging about in their field reports. In the field reports this week, they talked about how over the weekend, they carried out 150 airstrikes in Gaza over the course of 2 days, which brings the number to 1,400 airstrikes since March 18th, 1,900 people killed, including 600 children. And this is a war against civilians. There's the government health office talked about 37 aid distribution centers and 28 community kitchens being bombed. This is a war against civilians, and Netanyahu said this week that if they end the war today, that the Israeli military has lost the war in Gaza. So they don't believe that they're winning this war against civilians. Otherwise, Netanyahu wouldn't say things like that they lose. And it's not just Netanyahu. There's a significant element of the security establishment that believes that as well. So if we look at the next map, we can see southern Gaza up close. And let me just give you some numbers from this OCHA report that this map is from the humanitarian cluster. 82% of cropland destroyed, 78% of greenhouses, 72% of the fishing fleet destroyed, 95% of cattle destroyed, 70% of the agricultural wells have been destroyed, 450,000 housing units destroyed, 88.5% of school buildings from junior kindergarten through university have been destroyed, 92% of children in Gaza are not meeting their nutritional requirements, their most basic nutritional requirements. 88% of commercial and industrial buildings have been destroyed, 88% of the road network destroyed. This is just an attack on the society of Gaza. There was a number of operations in the south this week by the resistance, but they were pre-planted IEDs and mortar attacks along the Morag corridor that Israel is carving. If we look at the next map, we can take a look at northern Gaza, which has the same story. You can see the Netzarim corridor there is the purple up till most of the coast, and the evacuation zone all the way to the coast. Today, we're going to be focusing on two areas, Tufa, which is the old Gaza City, which is east of Gaza City, and Beit Hanun in the northeast there. In the purple is the buffer zone, and in the purple is overlapping with the no-go zone in Beit Hanun. There was a resistance operation up in that purple zone that we're going to get into today. And the next map, I showed you this in a map last week, the evacuation of the eastern edge of Tufa, Shujaia, and Zaytun. And this area is what we're going to start the resistance report on this week. If we look at number 5, we have a series of resistance operations in Tufa because the military came down off the hill. Like I said, as soon as they went into built up areas, you can see the fighter here with his Yasin in the tunnel. You can see the tunnel, the way the tunnel splits there, which makes it very difficult for the Israelis to take these tunnels. You see a tandem 85 strike here on a Caterpillar D9 bulldozer made in the United States. Direct hit, the fighter says, I lit it up as he goes back down into the tunnel. This operation was on Saturday and the video came out on Sunday. So we're seeing very prompt command and control, and the systems are working for getting these videos out right away. This fighter in the tunnel is saying that we are advancing to achieve a quick operation against the tyrannical enemy in Jabal Sarani. And you can see these are out on the edge of the built-up areas. We'll see in the next couple operations that they moved in to the city, and as soon as they did that, they were hit. We look at the next one, we can see, again, you can see the Tandem 85, so they're still using appropriate weapons. The Tandem 85 is used on the D9, and we've seen these kind of iconic shots from the view of the Archer throughout the war that take you right to the front lines. If we look at the next one, we have a Yasin strike against a Namr troop carrier. A Namr is a Merkava tank without its turret. It's heavily armored, so you're going to see the fighter emerge here. He's got his Yasin 105, which is an appropriate weapon for the heavily armored tank. You can see the cameraman here is in the same tunnel as the Archer, as the Yasin Archer, to get this. And the Israeli military admitted that these fighters got home, returned to their base safely, as Qassam would say. The Israeli military getting hit with these operations and unable to defend against them. The next one is against Merkava. So we have the complete set, and you can see the fighter using here the destroyed building as cover. We can see the tank commander's helmet sticking out of the top of the tank there. But this is what the destroyed buildings, this is the devastated terrain warfare that's left behind, and it gives the fighters cover. They don't have jungles or mountains like other guerrillas to use, so they use the destroyed rubble. They use their tunnel network to access the destroyed rubble and carry out a successful operation. We'll see in the next the picture here, you can see the destroyed building. The Israeli military thinks the building is flattened, but the tunnel still exists, and the fighters can come up and use that. We look at the next slide, you can see that they had multiple eyes on this tank. You can see the commander, the crewman sticking out of the tank there. So they, as soon as they came into built up areas, as soon as you see other buildings, immediately they're being hit. So that was in Tufa, in the old city of Gaza. That happened this week. And then this next operation is a remarkable operation in Beit Hanun. You can see the fighters emerging here out of a tunnel. This is called the Breaking the Sword ambush. You can see multiple fighters, as many as 6 in this squad, using the thistle overgrowth of the spring to carry out this operation. They're pointing out here that there's an Israeli military position which is connected to their base inside Israel. So this is in the buffer zone, 300 meters from the fence. You can see this truck. I'll get into that more later, with a truck with the Israeli flag, but now we see the Jeep. And so the fighters have intelligence on this operation and are again using appropriate weaponry, hitting the Jeep. As it comes out of this, you're going to see that the roof is popped off and the hood is popped off, and this Jeep is going to end up flipped on its head as these fighters come out of the tunnel wearing tactical gear. And this is the Beit Hanun battalion. So this is the place where the war began in October of 2023. It's also where it ended just before the ceasefire. You can see the fighters there heading back down into the tunnel. This was an operation against the 252nd Division of the IDF, whose job is to clear tunnels in this area. You can see a pretty spectacular failure in their operations and the success of the resistance. So this is a an internal road. The Israeli military said that this was an internal road. So this is a road that goes from base to base. And they believe they had this area in the buffer zone cleared, and 𝐓𝐡𝐞 is able to use the tunnel network to come out. Maybe we can just loop it around one more time and see it again. It's pretty remarkable how small the hole in this tunnel is, and the way that this is used to access the buffer zone. So now this is a rare operation that's out in the buffer zone, and they've used essentially the spring overgrowth as cover, like you would in a jungle or in the mountains. They're using the shrubbery as cover, and you can see they're completely hidden there. They pass on the 2 civilian vehicles, which only have a single driver in them, and they're targeting the command vehicle that is behind. And it was in fact a command vehicle. There was 3 wounded in this operation. The company commander who's in the vehicle lost their legs in this operation. So 𝐓𝐡𝐞 has intelligence above and below ground to execute this. And then 30 minutes later, after this attack that you're seeing, which is around 1 p.m., about 30 minutes later, the IDF sent a rescue force, reinforcements to come and get the Jeep, and the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 fighters hit that reinforcements that were coming to the scene with a television IED. The TV IED is one of the 4 core IEDs that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 uses in these operations. So a pretty significant operation that was obviously noted within the Israeli media. A lot of generals on TV, the talking heads, talking about this as a defeat, clearly, because they're inside what Israel believes is essentially their own territory at this point, expanding the buffer zone from one base that's on the other side of the fence to a forward position into the buffer zone. And we look at this next picture, you can see just how small the tunnel is that the fighters are coming out of, how difficult it is for Israel to find any of these tunnels. Even the most exaggerated estimate of the Israelis is that they've only been able to deal with 25% of the tunnels, and it's not even clear what that number refers to, because when the war started, Israel said there was 500 kilometers of tunnels. Once they started to experience the battlefield, they said there was 700 kilometers around December of 2023. And into 2024, they're talking about 1,000 kilometers. They have absolutely no idea how many kilometers of tunnels there are. And even if they go back and plug this one offensive tunnel, it's part of a spider webs network that we know from Israeli captives that is a spider web. So they'll just reconnect. And we look at the next picture, you can see in the overgrowth there, they've got full concealment from the spring overgrowth in the milk thistles that they're in there. You can see their tactical gear, and you can see in the upper right corner there's another fighter there, and you can barely see him camoed in the undergrowth. There's an IDF observation post 200 meters away from this. So this is a very tactical the tactical acumen of this operation requires significant intelligence that suggests that the resistance is all over the Israelis, even in this buffer zone area where it's difficult to reach. So a very significant operation. We look at the next slide. This was remarkable to see. So they're using the white pickup truck that's in Israelis' nightmares, but they have this massive Israeli flag on it, and the reason why they have this massive Israeli flag is so that the Israelis don't massacre them in these trucks, like they did in Rafah. Massacred the paramedics in Rafah who came with lights on their trucks. But the Israeli military released the investigation into that this week, and they talked about how that massacre of the paramedics began with an ambush that was set up against civilian police in Gaza, driving in very similar trucks. So this is the Israelis telling each other not to shoot these trucks. So they carry this massive flag, and the resistance, instead of shooting at this soft skinned truck or the truck in front of it with only one driver in it, they wait for the command vehicle. And you can see that in the next slide. It was the command vehicle. It was an M240 Storm which is an Israeli-made light armored vehicle that you see more often in the West Bank. These are the vehicles they use in the West Bank when they're not using tanks, because you can more easily open the doors to shoot at kids who are throwing stones at you. When they come into Gaza and they're hit in an area that they believe is their control, Israel is operating in this buffer zone as if this is inside Israel proper. And they get hit with an RPG and it flips their vehicle. And like I said, it was the command force that was hit. The company commander lost her legs in this operation, along with 2 other people that lost legs inside the vehicle. And then the reinforcements were hit, killing at least 1 and 3 more wounded in that. So 6 casualties in this resistance tunnel operation. If we look at the next slide, we can see another operation in Beit Hanun. This is on the edge of town. We see the Yasin Archer here firing RPGs at a newly established Israeli military position, pushing in on the edge of Beit Hanun. And here you see him firing multiple times. The same Archer grabs a second round, and we're going to see a third Archer firing from an elevated position down onto the Israeli position. Simultaneously, they have an artillery unit firing mortars at the position. So the fighters are on the ground in these built up areas. The Israelis just haven't come to these built up areas. This is the first week that they have, and they're immediately hit with those resistance operations in the Gaza Strip. So that is the resistance report for Gaza. We are going to move to Yemen now. The resistance in Yemen has continued this week. We pull up this first map to let you get situated. We are now at 40 straight days of U.S. assault on Yemen, predominantly in the Sana'a and Sada areas on the western edge of Yemen, but further to the east as well. There's been a number of strikes in Marib province that suggest perhaps preparing for this mercenary ground attack that the Americans have been talking about. There's been more than 1,000 airstrikes, according to Ansar Allah. And the United States Central Command released a statement this week, again, saying that their operations are 24/7. They've killed hundreds of people. They attacked many civilian, mostly in a lot of cases each day. Most of the targets on a day-to-day basis are civilian targets, and their ability to reach the mountain, the buried installations that Ansar Allah and the Yemeni armed forces have in the mountains, which we'll see coming up, makes the aerial attacks by the U.S. Are not destroying the capability of the Yemeni armed forces and Ansar Allah to carry out the blockade in the Red Sea. If we look at the next slide, you can see the range of the missiles. I showed you this last week, but I threw it back in this week because yesterday, for the first time, there was air raid sirens in Haifa. So Palestine 2 ballistic missile fired from Yemen was on its way to Haifa, so they can reach the furthest northern areas of Israel. And so that's why I have those missile ranges there, and also the drone ranges, because there was drone attacks also yesterday, Yafa drone attack against Tel Aviv, and there was 3 of those this week. If we look at the next slide, this is the positioning of the U.S. Navy vessels. This is from the United States Naval Institute. So they're showing you the positions. The Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group is north of Yemen. It's north of Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. It's around Yanbu, and it hasn't come closer than that on any satellite imagery that we've seen. They're staying as far out of range up in the north of the Red Sea as possible. The USS Vincennes Carrier Strike Group arrived last week into the theater, as the military calls it. They're off the coast of Oman right now. They are also staying 500-700 kilometers, even more, back from Yemen, especially back from Western Yemen, where the missiles, the ballistic missiles, the anti-ship missiles, the anti-ship cruise missiles, and the drones are launched against these vessels. And as soon as the Vincennes arrived in theater, it was hit with simultaneous attack. The Yemeni armed forces hit the Truman carrier strike group and its warships, and the Vincent's carrier strike group and its warships, with multiple anti-ship cruise missiles and drones, 10 in all simultaneously. And that goes along with some numbers that Abdel Malik al-Houthi, the leader of Ansar Allah, said in his Thursday speech last week. He said that there had been 78 operations this month by the Yemeni armed forces that included 171 ballistic and cruise missiles and drones. There was 33 operations so far against the Truman carrier strike group, 122 ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, anti-ship ballistic missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles, and drones versus the Truman. And there's been 26 operations against Israel with more than 30 missiles. In that speech, Abdel Malik al-Houthi said, "I call on our dear people to turn out in massive numbers tomorrow in the capital Sana'a and the rest of the provinces according to our arrangements." And did they ever? And they do this every single week, these remarkable demonstrations, massive demonstrations in support of both Palestine and in support of Yemen fighting for Palestine. These massive demonstrations, there's another image of it. And these speeches by Abdel Malik al-Houthi, I reported a few weeks ago, Abu Hamza, posthumous speech that was delivered to a conference in Yemen, said that the fighters on the front lines in Gaza all sit and listen to Abdel Malik al-Houthi's speeches every week on Thursdays. Abu Hamza said that they listened to them as if he were in the heart of Gaza with the fighters. So massive demonstrations, massive popular support. So any talk of the Americans in this mercenary ground war where they would have the UAE mercenaries, Saudi mercenaries, and American mercenary companies fighting in this war, these demonstrations show that is not going to be an easy battle if that is the way that this goes. And Ansar Allah has said that to open this battlefield, they're more than ready for that if that is what is come. If the next slide we look at, we got also a number of Reaper drones down this week. Ansar Allah showed us this video. I believe these are the 358 when you see the targeting screen like that. And these drones, these Reaper drones, are very important to the U.S. fight right now because they don't have troops on the ground. They have very little intelligence. We know they get some intelligence from the Israelis, but they don't have much intelligence either. And the kind of strikes that the Americans are launching require on the ground information about where to hit. And because of these because of their air defense systems shooting these drones down, the American ships, they stay way back, but also the fighter jets that are on the aircraft carriers, they stay far back out of Yemeni airspace. They're not traveling over like they do in Gaza and tearing through the sky and dropping bombs. They're firing long range joint strike munitions that are far outside the reach of air defenses because they're afraid of Yemeni air defenses. So they rely on these Reaper drones. And because of that, the Yemenis have been harvesting these Reapers, these $30 million drones that we've seen in every sort of disrepair, like this guy going through the black box here. And these drones, this is drone number 20 that Ansar Allah has downed. The Yemenis are saying this is America under our feet. Also in Gaza this week, there was reports from sources in Gaza saying they saw MQ-9 Reapers flying over Gaza as well, something that's happened since October. So these are the same drones in the same battle spaces. And the next one is another Reaper that we can see. We have zoomed in on this one to show you. This is one of the few. I'm not sure if we've seen another one in actual descent like this, but this is an armed drone. Clearly, you can see the munitions explode there over to the right side of the screen. Massive explosion, and the missiles that are hanging off the wings of the Reapers are part of the reason why they're so easy, relatively easy to pluck out of the air. Radar, they make a massive radar signature with those heavy, shiny missiles hanging off the wings. They're low, they're slow, they're lumbering, and the Yemenis are able to move their anti-aircraft missile defense into position, launch, and hit these Reapers out of the sky, and then get away, shoot and scoot, and they are not getting hit. So there's no follow-up to this. And you can see these mountains. In this shot, these mountains are the mountains where the missile facilities, the missile bases are built into these mountains. So it's very difficult. And one of the reasons why the B-2 bombers have been brought in is to drop heavier ordnance than the F-18s can drop that take off from the aircraft carriers, because they're buried missile facilities that are not being reached. The Yemeni armed forces said that they would match escalation for escalation. They have been ready for that escalation of the ground war. They said that they are ready for it. Fox, the Yemeni on the scene in this video, he says that, let the world know we have shot down American drones during the Biden era, and we will shoot down many more during the Trump era. A Pentagon official told Fox News this week that the United States had 230 Reapers as of late 2024. So we're talking about Ansar Allah wiping out 10% of the Reaper fleet, and they've taken 7 in this month alone, which you can see. Look at those mountains. So that's where the missile bases are. They're buried deep in those mountains, and that's how they've indigenously produced these weapons, and why they are largely safe from U.S. attack. You can see on the last slide here that Ansar Allah has been showing you, has been showing us every time they down one. This is the 22nd downed since October 7th, and the 26th overall, because the Yemenis started downing drones during the American-Saudi war on Yemen over the previous decade. So that is the resistance report for this week, day 566 of the war in Gaza.
Thank you so much, Jon. And remind us the cost of these drones, and they're American, right? They're American.
They're American, yeah. They're like 33 to 35 million a pop. We're talking about $600+ million in drones alone. They're talking $200 million in air defense missiles that these aircraft carriers and their the fleet that's around the escorts around the aircraft carriers are using. And there's no end in sight for this. The Yemenis are not going to run out of munitions, and the Americans are using their air defense munitions at a rate far more than they produce each year. So they're going into their stockpiles in order to carry this out. So, and they said the U.S. said they're not gonna stop until the Yemenis surrender, and the Yemenis are not going to surrender. The only way this stops is if the ceasefire that the United States guaranteed continues in Gaza, because that is the criteria for the Yemenis' participation in this war: ending the siege, ending the aggression, and ending the siege on Gaza.
Yeah, really incredible. Thank you so much, Jon. Before we have a couple of things to get to, but I just wanted to maybe ask for your analysis on any sort of ceasefire talks. I mean, right now there's, it seems like every day a new delegation of officials are meeting in Qatar, and every day Israel says that nothing less than complete surrender and genocide is what they're gonna accept. Ali, Jon, Asa, where are we right now with these so-called ceasefire negotiations?
I mean, Netanyahu spoke this week about them, and he said that if they were to stop the war now, they would lose the war. The war would be lost. They would be surrendering, and they would be losing everything that their soldiers had died for. If the war ends, Netanyahu's government likely falls, and he begins corruption trials that could put him in jail for up to a decade. So he wants to continue this war. His coalition partners want the war to continue, and they threatened to pull out, and were pulling out during the ceasefire. He got them back in for the budget to be passed. From 𝐓𝐡𝐞's point of view, same situation. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 has openly and said they're willing to release all the captives on the first day of a ceasefire, all of them at once. But there has to be an end to the war. You can't have this ceasefire that they've watched the Israelis have in Lebanon, where they use the ceasefire to achieve military gains that they could not achieve against Hezbollah fighters on the ground. That there has to be a withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza, and the war has to end. Otherwise, the Israeli captives are not going to come back. And there has to be a large prisoner exchange for Palestinian prisoners. These are the same criteria that have been since October the 7th. By 10 p.m. at night, it was understood what the guidelines were going to be for this.
Right. Oh, it's enraging. Ali, did you have any particular insights on these ceasefire talks as well?
I agree with everything Jon said.
Yeah.
I emphasize that what Netanyahu said, that they would lose the war if they stop now, tells you that they've lost the war. 18 months in of unrelenting genocide. This is, the sunk cost fallacy. We've come this far at something that has been a complete catastrophe, even from Israel's perspective.
Yeah.
And so we have to keep going. When the smart thing to do, not to mention the moral and humane thing to do, would be to stop right now. And I think we'll talk a bit later about the US-Iran talks, but I think that can give us a very slight amount of optimism that there is still a prospect of a ceasefire. But for the reasons Jon mentioned, all these proposals going backwards and forwards, it's hard to take that seriously until something actually happens, because we hear it all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for that. Let's talk about Pope Francis. Ali, you wanted to talk about not just what Pope Francis meant to the people, especially the Christian Catholic community in Gaza, but also the way that the coverage of his death has been very suspiciously, any coverage of his connection to Gaza was suspiciously or not suspiciously omitted.
Yeah, that's changed a little bit, as we'll see, but you're basically right. But just, of course, as a reminder, Pope Francis passed away early on Monday morning, just hours after he gave a blessing and greeted crowds celebrating Easter Sunday at St. Peter's Square at Vatican City in Rome. His final message, read from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, included these words: "I think of the people of Gaza and its Christian community in particular, where the terrible conflict continues to cause death and destruction and to create a dramatic and deplorable humanitarian situation. I appeal to the warring parties, call a ceasefire, release the hostages, and come to the aid of a starving people that aspires to a peace, a future." And indeed, throughout the last 18 months, Francis never forgot about the people of Gaza. He spoke about them at almost all his appearances, and he held nightly calls with Gaza's small Christian community. And let's take a look at a clip of Pope Francis speaking with people at the Holy Family Catholic Parish Church in Gaza from his residence at Casa Santa Maria in January. And he's speaking with Father Gabriel Romanelli and Father Yusuf Asad, the rector and vice rector of the parish, respectively, and they're in Gaza.
Grazie tante. E prega a favore, non contro. A domani. A domani. Shukran. Shukran.
I thought that was such a delightful clip there. The people in Gaza saying the people here are praying for you, and he makes a joke. He says, make sure they pray for me and not against me. And then I thought it was charming the way he said shukran in Arabic. And that was just a clip of his call. And he did those calls every night for a long time. Reportedly, they became a little less frequent in recent weeks as his health failed, but he still kept them up whenever he could, giving great comfort to the few hundred Palestinian Christians still in Gaza trying to survive this genocide. But in fact, he has been quite outspoken. Let's take a clip of him speaking. This was about a year ago. I don't have the date in front of me, but let's play this clip, Tamara.
I continue to receive sad news. Civilians, unarmed civilians who are being bombed and shot at. And this has happened even within a parish complex of the Holy Family, where there aren't terrorists there, but there are people there, sick people, sisters, a mother and her daughter. And he said their names. They were killed, and other people were wounded while they were going to the bathroom. And the convent of the Sisters of Mother Teresa was bombarded. Their generator was hit. Some are saying it's terrorism and war. Yes, it's war. Yes, it's terrorism.
That was actually on December 17th, 2023, when Pope Francis was giving the Angelus prayer at St. Peter's, and he specifically mentioned the murder of two sisters by the Israeli occupation forces, and he called it terrorism. So that was quite striking that he referred to Israel's attacks on Palestinians as terrorism. And here's one more clip of him being quite outspoken, as he typically was. Let's take a look at this.
E ieri sono stati bombardati bambini. Questo è crudeltà. Questo non è guerra. Voglio dirlo perché tocca al cuore.
And that was on December 21st of last year. You can hear his breathing is struggling a little bit, where he condemns Israel's murder of Palestinian children and says, this is cruelty, this is not war. And what was interesting about that is he was speaking, this was a very formal ceremony, speaking to the Roman Curia in the big audience hall at the Vatican, and he gave a very formal address to the gathered clergy. But that's how he started. He spoke about Gaza first. That was the first, those were the first words out of his mouth. So it was always on his mind. The people in Gaza were always on his mind. And he went perhaps even further than that. And maybe you could say even further than any other major political leader in the West, In November, he wrote, and this was in a book published by the Pope, quote, "According to some experts, what is happening in Gaza has the characteristics of a genocide. It should be carefully investigated to determine whether it fits into the technical definition formulated by jurists and international bodies." And anyone who's adept at reading statements from popes knows that things are often not said in a very direct way. So that is his way of calling what Israel is doing genocide, something we haven't heard, as far as I know, from any other Western leader. And he also pushed the same message in private with Israeli leaders. In late October 2023, the Pope spoke with Israeli President Isaac Herzog, admonishing him for Israel's barbaric massacres of Palestinians. The Washington Post reported in November 2023, quote, "The Israeli head of state was describing his nation's horror over the Hamas attack on October 7th, when the Pope issued a blunt rejoinder. 'It is forbidden to respond to terror with terror,' Francis said, according to a senior Israeli official familiar with the call, which has not been reported previously." And the Washington Post actually says that the Pope continued to press this, and that the Israelis felt that the call went so badly that they didn't even announce publicly that it had happened. And this later came out in the form of leaks or this story in the Washington Post. Reverend Munther Ishaq, a Palestinian Christian theologian and an evangelical Lutheran minister in Bethlehem, wrote after the Pope's death, "Pope Francis was beloved in Palestine. He conveyed true compassion to Palestinians, most notably to those in Gaza during the genocide. Some years ago, Pope Francis visited Bethlehem," Ishaq recalls. "We all remember the iconic image of him praying at the wall." And I remembered that, and it was quite striking to me how long ago that felt. But it is a reminder that Pope Francis has been outspoken for a Western religious leader or political leader when it comes to Palestine. But what struck me following his death is how many Western political leaders and media organizations praised Francis as someone who specifically spoke out on behalf of the world's most marginalized, but as you said, Nora, without mentioning his outspokenness over many years when it comes to Palestine. And so here's just a couple of examples. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer wrote, quote, "Pope Francis was a pope for the poor, the downtrodden, and the forgotten." Those would be the same downtrodden and forgotten that Keir Starmer is helping Israel to starve and murder in Gaza, particularly by sending Royal Air Force spy planes over Gaza regularly to help gather intelligence to assist the Israeli military in this genocide. And then here's EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. She wrote, quote, "He inspired millions far beyond the Catholic Church with his humility and love so pure for the less fortunate." I think many of us can remember Ursula von der Leyen donning a flak jacket and going on a propaganda tour of the Israeli colonies near Gaza, listening to the lies and atrocity propaganda about burned babies, and then giving a full-throated endorsement to the genocide that so pained Pope Francis until his final day. He mentioned Gaza in his very last Easter message on his last day. And you can see this in the media too. Here's the New York Times headline: "Francis's death silences a voice for the voiceless." And they say, as democratic values and alliances were being turned upside down, the Pope was a consistent moral guidepost. Who can play that role now? Well, not the New York Times writer of this article, who completely omits the Pope's consistent mention of Palestinians, and particularly Gaza, throughout his pontificate. And here's another similar story from the Washington Post, headlined, Pope Francis dies at 88, and in the subhead there you can see it says, as first Latin American pontiff, he reshaped the papacy with his openness and empathy for the disenfranchised. Few people on this planet are more disenfranchised now than the people of Gaza or the Palestinians, and yet the article makes no mention of that. Of course, this is not just in the United States. On the day the Pope died, journalist Samira Mohyeddin posted on Twitter, she wrote, "A fun thing I'm doing today is watching/listening to all Canadian mainstream media coverage of the Pope's death and seeing how many acknowledge his speeches on Gaza and the fact that he called the parish in Gaza once a day to check on them. 5 hours in and nothing yet." So this certainly characterized the mainstream media coverage I saw, but there was a complete contrast on social media where there has been a huge focus on the Pope's concern for Gaza and his constant connection with people there. And I feel that it's in large part due to that some media responded belatedly, and there have now been a few articles focusing on this to give credit where it's due. And the New York Times on Tuesday ran this article headlined, "Even in Sickness, Pope Francis Reached Out to Gaza's Christians." But it was striking that the article itself downplays how the Pope has consistently called Israel's attacks on Palestinians terrorism and even a genocide. And here CNN even had a story that you can see the headline there. The Pope called them every night until his final hours. Now Gaza's Christians cling to the hope he left behind. So it would really appear that the Pope's message is breaking through. And one way we know that is how bitterly angry Israel is about it. So we can see here this story in the Times of Israel that Israel is snubbing the Pope's funeral. They're sending only a very low-level envoy instead of their president, 𝐓𝐴𝐧𝐭𝐫 𝐄𝐥𝐞, which would be the appropriate level of representation, since the Pope not only is the spiritual leader for 1.3 billion Catholics, but is also the head of state of Vatican City, which is a country in its own right. And just to show how petty Israel is, the foreign ministry of Israel actually deleted a tweet that it had posted expressing condolences for the Pope's death. The Times of Israel reports, "Rest in peace, Pope Francis. May his memory be a blessing." That's what read the Post. It was taken down hours later, and diplomatic missions around the world were ordered to take down any similar posts and not to sign condolence books in Vatican embassies, the Ynet news site reported Tuesday. So you can see how bitter and petty Israel is behaving, and what disrespect it's showing not only to the Pope as a person, but to Catholics and Christians all over the world who even if they didn't share his faith, respected him. And I want to say here that, I understand that a lot of people have a complicated relationship with the Catholic Church as an institution.
To put it mildly.
A lot of unfinished business, also to put it mildly, in terms of its role in genocides in North and South America, the cover-ups of child abuse at many church-run institutions around the world. Those are all important issues for people. But what I've been talking about is Pope Francis as a person and his relationship to Palestinians and his outspokenness in terms of a Western political leader, which he was because he's a head of state, but also a Western spiritual leader in terms of being willing to speak out more clearly and more consistently than many others have. And that's something that certainly Palestinians felt a great deal of appreciation for. And I think that's something we I wanted to acknowledge as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, the Catholic Church is the Catholic Church. And you know, Pope Francis was you know, definitely one of the better heads of that institution in a long time. But yeah, it's not just petty what the Israeli government did. It shows their entire, you know, this narcissistic worldview, where, you know, if people aren't, you know, groveling at their feet every single second of the day and letting them get away with war crimes and genocide and not, you know, not being held to any sort of account, then, you know, that person who, as you said, represents a good, you know, a good portion of the planet, is just treated as, you know, persona non grata. And yeah, I think that's Israeli political culture in a nutshell.
Yeah, and what causes Israel to boycott the Pope's funeral and the Catholic Church is the good that has come out of it in terms of speaking up for Gaza. That's the thing that they couldn't tolerate. So, right. You know, so that's Israel. There you go.
Yep. There you go. Let's talk about the state of the U.S.-Iran nuclear talks. There were some meetings in Cairo, I believe. Ali, what can you say about what's going on there and the significance of, you know, what it means in terms of both Israel and the U.S. You know, continuing to orchestrate this genocide and try and, you know, maintain some sort of hegemony in the region.
Yeah, of course, we've been following this story for the past couple of weeks. We had said that since Netanyahu was summoned to Washington at the beginning of this month, that it looked like the U.S. was, for now, not willing to back the push by Israel and its partisans in the United States for a joint U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran, which Israel very desperately wants and has been pushing for. And so they've held now, is it 2 weeks of talks in Oman?
That's right,
between
Oman,
between the foreign minister of Iran and Mr. Arakchi and Steve Witkoff, President Trump's personal representative, towards a new nuclear deal. And these talks are continuing now this coming Saturday, and they will now move to a level of technical experts speaking, so that's a sign that they're advancing. And we've had comments from Albaz Arakchi, the Iranian foreign minister, that the talks are yielding, quote, very good progress. Now, some interesting signals from the United States that are worth noting is that Secretary of State Mark Rubio this week gave an interview, and he said that a potential war with Iran would be, quote, much messier and more complex than military engagements that the American people have seen in recent years. He said, quote, any military action at this point in the Middle East, whether it's against Iran by us or anybody else, could in fact trigger a much broader conflict, Rubio said in an interview with the Free Press that was published on Wednesday. He also said, any sort of armed conflict in the region is going to be much messier than what people are used to seeing. And that's why the president is so committed to the peaceful resolution, the prevention of an armed conflict. Although he reserves every right to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, he is for peace. He has said that repeatedly, and that's why we want to end the war in Ukraine if that's possible. And I'm reading from a report in The Hill, which notes that the remarks come after the Barry Weiss of the Free Press, which is the publication Rubio spoke to, asked the Secretary of State about comments by Tucker Carlson. He is, of course, a well-known conservative commentator, asserting that a strike on Iran's nuclear facilities would, quote, almost certainly result in thousands of American deaths at bases throughout the Middle East and cost the United States billions of dollars. Those aren't guesses. Those are the Pentagon's own estimates. A bombing campaign against Iran will set off a war, and it will be America's war, end quote. So those were Tucker Carlson's comments, an influential voice on the right. Another thing that Rubio said that is worth noting, and this connects with something I pointed out last week, Rubio said, quote, there's a pathway to a civil, peaceful nuclear program if they want one. So recall what I pointed out last week, Trump's comments saying the only thing they can't have is a bomb. In other words, Trump was not setting as a ceiling for these talks that Iran has to dismantle its entire nuclear program. So Rubio seems to be confirming that. And, you know, these comments from Rubio, I think, can be taken as another signal to Israel and its lobby that the US is not going to fight this war for them. Of course, there's always a chance that this is some kind of bluff by the Americans. It's some kind of effort to mislead the Iranians, to give them a false sense of security and then maybe take them by surprise. We could imagine a scenario like that. But the reason I think it's less likely to be that is, one, I think that would take a great deal of discipline that this administration doesn't have. The other, and more important, is we can see the reality in Yemen. If the United States is unable to defeat Ansarullah in Yemen, unable to restore freedom of navigation in the Red Sea for Israel-bound ships, unable to stop the Houthis from shooting down their drones, unable to stop Ansarullah, also known as the Houthis, from firing missiles towards Israel, then what will be the outcome of a much more difficult and challenging attempt to attack Iran? So it seems to be that that reality is sinking in. It doesn't mean that there will be no war. I hope and pray there will be no war, but it does mean the US understands its limitations. And the real difficulty here, I think, is that Trump tore up that nuclear deal that the Obama administration had signed in 2015, saying, oh, it's a terrible deal because it didn't deal with Iran's ballistic missiles, it didn't deal with Iran's support for resistance movements across the region. Well, now the US is in a situation where the best it's going to be able to get is something similar to the deal that Trump tore up. Yes, there may be adjustments or changes that allow Trump to claim some sort of victory that wasn't there, but that is really more or less what's on the table, because Iran isn't going to give up its entire program. They have no reason to trust the United States. And so the question is, can the United States accept basically what would be a defeat in that sense of going back to the deal they tore up? And that's the open question here. And how does this connect to Gaza, which was part of your question, Nora, is that I think that a successful deal, if they reach one, depends on not having war all across the region. For the US, they will not want that. And so that may, again, this is me being hopeful, give the Trump administration an incentive to call Netanyahu back in and say, that's it, wrap this up. It's not going anywhere. We've supported you. we're not going to support this anymore. So I don't know. I hope that that's the case, but those are significant comments, I think, by Rubio.
Yeah. We will continue to keep watching that, obviously. I mean, the maniacs with their hands on the buttons from the White House. We just have to do whatever we can to keep, trying to bring everyone back to reality. And I don't know. It's really kind of this, this feeling of of doom every day. That the Trump administration wants to accelerate and reignite, these wars of aggression and occupation, and no. So anyway, we will keep watching that. Thanks, Ali. The last thing we wanted to talk about was more censoring on Gaza reporting by 60 Minutes, which is, a very kind of a legacy media, documentary investigation over the, last few decades. And it seems that they were censored over giving a platform to what was happening in Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, this is as much about how the New York Times covers things, which is often a topic on this program. And we can see the report here with the headline, 60 Minutes chief resigns in emotional meeting. The company is done with me. And as you mentioned, 60 Minutes is this very iconic news magazine that goes back decades in the United States and is sort of very prestigious. I know there's 60 Minutes Australia too, which is basically a franchise because I've seen many episodes of it on YouTube. But the New York Times reports CBS News entered a new period of turmoil on Tuesday after the executive producer of 60 Minutes, Bill Owens, said he would resign from the long-running Sunday news program, citing encroachments on his journalistic independence. And then they say that at an emotional meeting on Tuesday, Mr. Owens's voice sounded raw, and he struggled with his words, tearing up as he announced his decision to the 60 Minutes staff, which had gathered in its office across from the CBS News headquarters in Midtown Manhattan. It also says, during the meeting, Mr. Owens alluded to his displeasure with additional layers of oversight that CBS executives had placed on the program. Quote, in a million years, the corporation didn't know what was coming up. They trusted CBS to report the stories and program the broadcast the way 60 Minutes saw fit, he said. Any change to that arrangement, he added, created a slippery slope. Now, the journalist Layla Al-Arian, of course, who we've had on this live stream on several occasions, pointed out that it wasn't really until deep into this New York Times article that we get to the crux of the matter. It's not in the headline, it's not in the opening paragraphs, you have to really read down into it. And that's that Shari Redstone, the controlling shareholder of Paramount, the company that owns CBS, had complained specifically about 60 Minutes' coverage of Gaza. According to the New York Times, again, this is buried deep in the story, quote, Ms. Redstone complained to CBS executives in January about a 60 Minutes segment on the war between Israel and Hamas. And a day later, the company appointed a veteran CBS producer, Susan Zirinsky, to a new role overseeing the news division's journalistic standards. So all it took was a phone call from a key shareholder. This is Shari Redstone, and I think she is the daughter of the late Sumner Redstone, who was for a long time the controlling shareholder of CBS, and they're a very, very pro-Israel Zionist family. And it should have been the main story there, the lead, that CBS takes away 60 Minutes' historic independence, journalistic independence that it's had for 57 years because of a report on Gaza, because in order to protect Israel. And what was that report? Well, we can see here that in January, 60 Minutes broadcast a report on dissent within the State Department, and the way they describe it, as the Israel-Hamas war continues and the Gaza death toll rises, former State Department officials tell 60 Minutes their concern about how the Biden administration has handled the war. And you'll recall, this is actually something we discussed with Layla Al-Arian, because the Al Jazeera program, of which she's the executive producer, had done that incredible piece that we spoke to her about how the Biden administration State Department was deliberately covering up how Israel was purposefully blocking humanitarian aid into Gaza, and was State Department officials were blowing the whistle and saying how they found this morally reprehensible, that this was being covered up. So this was what got CBS to take away the historic independence of 60 Minutes. It ought to be.
And now they have like a babysitter.
Yeah, and it's so similar to what the universities do. The minute there's any pushback from a big donor, Shari Redstone in this case is a shareholder. In the case of Columbia University, it would be a call from a big donor, someone like the donors who have been active there, like Bill Ackman and others, who are now, by the way, it's being reported in the New York Times, putting pressure. Bill Ackman, William Ackman, this big pro-Israel hedge fund billionaire, Penny Pritzker, scion of the the billionaire Pritzker family, which is also historically very pro-Israel, and now putting pressure on Harvard to back off from its defending itself against the Trump administration's efforts to bring this university effectively under government control and take away its independence. That's what these billionaire donors or shareholders want, effectively destroying every American institution for the sake of Israel, whether it's a university or a venerable independent news show like 60 Minutes, which, although was very mainstream, occasionally did, pretty good and pretty searching investigative reporting. But that is now no more, just because we're not allowed to talk about how Israel is deliberately starving and murdering 2 million people in Gaza.
The more things change, the more they stay the same, of course. Thanks for that. It's always just stunning how shallow and short-sighted these attempts at censorship are, whether it's on university campuses or whether it's in the newsrooms, whatever's left of these newsrooms anymore. But here at the Electronic Intifada, we do not fall into such traps. We are committed to publishing true investigative, true independent journalism day after day after day.
No billionaire donors have called me up and said we can't talk about the things we talk about. On the contrary, it's because we are. It's because we're independent, and because we know we know that our readers, our viewers have our backs, and they support the work we do. That we will continue to tell the truth here. And we can see, we're seeing now, everything is being laid bare in terms of the corruption and censorship and cowardice in so many institutions of our societies that have completely, it's all been exposed by Gaza.
Yes, absolutely. we have, as always, we have these incredible feature pieces by people in Gaza writing about what they know, what they see, what they feel, what they smell, what they touch every day. I read an excerpt of that wonderful feature by Asma Abdu about Fatima Hassouna, photographer, photojournalist. She was only 25, who was assassinated along with her entire family last week in Gaza. Just incredible reporting there, as well as that one story right there. Where is the Salvation Smurfette? Was published a few days ago by Rasha Abu Jalal about a puppet show theater that people are trying to put on in Gaza to alleviate some of the, I don't even know what it's not even trauma at this point. It's just complete psychological catastrophe, especially for children. So go check that out. We have some incredible reports by our staff writers. Of course, Tamara Nassar's report up there at the top about the plans by the settlement administrator and finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, who is bragging about accelerating the land theft and the settlement expansions all over the occupied West Bank. And so go check that out. I read an excerpt of that in the news report, but there's so much more in that fantastic report by Tamara. So please go read that. Dave Cronin has a couple of new pieces on, there we go, cops in Brussels seize Palestinian activist on the city's streets. So more ramping up of repression across Europe because of Gaza. And really good reporting there. Thanks, Dave. And all of our contributors, all of our staff members, people who are working day in and day out to report the actual news, away from the prying eyes of military censors or government censors or billionaire donors. So please remember to sign up for our email list. You can get notified of these live streams and other special podcasts that we do. And every day you'll get a digest of the features and the reports that we've published. Again, if there's ever a time to donate to independent media, it is now. And if you have a couple bucks, we always appreciate the donations so that we can keep this vital infrastructure of this independent media platform going and pay our writers in Gaza, and especially our monthly donors. Ali, did you want to give a special shout out to our monthly?
Well, we're grateful to absolutely everyone who supports our work. We just like to give a special shout out to people who've made that commitment, whether it's for $5 a month or sometimes quite a bit more, because that gives us sort of the stability and predictability to be able to know that we can sustain our work and continue sharing this vital news and information with people all over the world. And I'm just going to shout out a few names of people who've made gifts in the last few days. Just first names. They include Mohamed, Thomas, Caleb, Anne, and Bruce. And we're grateful to you and to the many, many more people who we haven't named. But just to say that we truly appreciate it. We can't say that enough, because that's what helps us to put all of this information and analysis out into the world. And it's working. It's changing hearts and minds. The truth changes hearts and minds, but we have to be able to tell it. And thank you for helping us do that.
Indeed. Thank you. And a special thanks, as always, to Tamara Nassar for directing and producing this live stream and the podcast. And everything else she does. Thank you to Maureen Claire Murphy, our senior editor, Michael F. Brown for fact-checking, Ellie Gerzon for social media, everyone at the Electronic Intifada, our editors, and just an incredible staff that we have that we're all so lucky and proud to work with every day. And on behalf of myself and Jon, Ali, and Asa, and Tamara, thank you all, and we will see you next week.